The ISS Valiant dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder, the stars stretching out in front of it like a painted canvas. A sleek, black vessel, the size of a city block, its hull covered in jagged scars from previous battles. On the bridge, Captain Ilias Vance stood tall, arms crossed, eyes locked on the vast expanse of the galaxy before him. He wasn't impressed. To him, space was just another place to conquer. He wasn't here to cower or beg. He was here to negotiate. Beside him, Lieutenant Sienna Cross, the ship's second-in-command, checked the data feeds on her tablet. Approaching Seshkar space, Captain. Diplomatic fleet in range. Vance nodded. The Treaty of Seshkar was about to begin, a gathering of galactic empires, each more powerful than the last, all in one place to discuss the future of the galaxy. And humanity. Well, the galaxy's so-called experts had decided Earth wasn't worth acknowledging. At least, not until now. This is it, then, Vance muttered under his breath. Time to make an impression. The Valiant sent out a deep, sonorous pulse as it broadcast its approach. It was an unspoken challenge, a reminder that no one had ever come this close to the Empire's heart without feeling the pressure. Humanity had arrived, whether they were welcome or not. The first sign of trouble came when the Imperial fleet, sleek and glimmering, like a formation of predatory fish, shifted in their orbits. Ships flanked the Valiant on all sides, their weapon systems primed and tracking the newcomer with alarming precision. The peace talks had already been tense, but now the room fell silent. "We're being watched," Lieutenant Cross said, her voice tight. Vance smirked. "Good. Let them watch." Without further warning, the diplomatic comms officer broadcasted a signal to the Seshkar leaders. On every screen in the room, the faces of the galaxy's most powerful leaders flickered to life. Their expressions were stern, unreadable, but the way their eyes briefly flickered to the Valiant, a ship with no markings, no allegiances, told a different story. The lead ambassador, a tall figure draped in shimmering gold armor, spoke first. His voice, smooth but laced with suspicion, rang out. "We welcome the arrival of Earth's representatives, though we do not recognize your fleet's exuberance." The word was polite, but the tension was unmistakable. Vance tilted his head. "This is our escort ship, Ambassador. I suggest you keep the full respect to our delegation, or we might be forced to bring the rest of our fleet next time." A ripple of silence ran through the room. The words, calm and cool, were chilling in their simplicity. The ambassador raised an eyebrow, clearly trying to keep his composure. "Is that a threat, Captain?" "Not at all," Vance replied with a grin. "Just a friendly warning." The chamber seemed to hold its breath. The ambassador's gaze flickered once more toward the Valiant, then quickly returned to the captain. Something shifted in the air, an unspoken understanding. They might have thought humanity was a fringe player, but now they had to rethink everything. And it hadn't even started yet. The council hall buzzed with muted conversations as the galaxy's most powerful representatives took their seats, the atmosphere thick with suspicion. Outside the thick, transparent walls of the massive structure, 1,000 starships hovered, the sleek lines of Imperial ships glimmering under the starlight. All eyes were on the small delegation from Earth, fewer than 30 humans, gathered together in a corner of the chamber, looking far less imposing than the surrounding alien fleets. Captain Vance stood tall, arms folded across his chest, a confident grin on his face. His crew, human soldiers who had been chosen for their strength, skill, and most importantly, their ability to blend into the backdrop, were positioned nearby. They looked more like tourists than diplomats. Some casually leaning against walls, others chatting in small groups, all deceptively at ease. At the head of the table, the Imperial High Chancellor, Lord Vale of the Chavesi Empire, looked down at Vance with barely concealed disdain. "Captain Vance, it seems you've brought only a handful of your people. One might assume you've left your army back on Earth." Vance chuckled lightly, the sound sending an unspoken challenge through the room. What can I say? We're a modest species. The words were easy, almost mocking, but the undercurrent was something else. The sheer audacity of the humans, their casual manner in the face of this room full of the galaxy's most dangerous leaders, made the atmosphere feel heavier. Across the table, the Imperial delegation shifted uncomfortably, and a few muttered amongst themselves. They'd been briefed about humanity's unexpected entrance into galactic diplomacy, but they hadn't anticipated this. This confidence, modesty. Lord Vale's voice was cold, his yellow eyes narrowing. Or is it something else? The Valiant is an impressive ship, Captain, but not a true warship. Perhaps you've brought your forces with you. Hidden them somewhere. Vance leaned forward, his grin widening just enough to let the room know he wasn't intimidated. Oh, you'll be the first to know if we bring out our real fleet, Lord Vale. But this, he gestured casually to the 30 soldiers around him. This is just our diplomatic corps. We leave the heavy lifting to others. The Chavesi Lord's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, Lieutenant Cross, standing near the door, raised an eyebrow and spoke. I'm sure Lord Val's wondering why you're still questioning our strength. You see, we have a tendency to not show off unless we have to. The room went silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Every leader in the chamber was watching, waiting. Finally, Val's lips curled into a smile, but it was thin, like a blade being slowly drawn. Very well, Captain. Let us proceed then. We shall see just how powerful a modest species truly is. Vance didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to his soldiers and gave a brief, almost imperceptible signal. It happened so quickly that no one saw it coming. One of Vance's crew, a young soldier named Haler, stepped forward. Without any warning, he shifted into combat stance. His fists moved like lightning, first striking the nearby wall with a crack that rattled the entire room, then flowing into a series of rapid movements, a blur of fists and feet. Within seconds, he had reduced a heavy training drone to scrap metal, his movements so swift, it was as if he was everywhere at once. The room was dead silent. The ambassadors and dignitaries of the galaxy's empires exchanged looks, their previous confidence now chipped away. The Chavesi Lord's smile faltered. Vance's voice cut through the quiet. Just a demonstration. We thought it might help you understand what we're capable of. The display was simple, brutal, efficient, and entirely unprovoked. It was clear now. Humanity wasn't here to make friends or beg for alliances. They were here because they didn't have to prove their might. It was simply in their bones. Lord Vale finally broke the silence. Impressive, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. But you'd best be careful, Captain. If your people are so powerful, you may find the galaxy less hospitable than you think. Vance's grin returned, a playful glint in his eyes. I'll take my chances. And with that, the first real test of humanity's strength had been thrown down. Now, the question was whether the galaxy could stand to face it. The tension in the Grand Hall was thicker than the air on a swampy planet. The galaxy's elite, all gathered for the first real meeting with humanity, shifted uneasily in their seats. After the shocking display from Captain Vance's crew, the mood had soured, but not enough to stop the diplomatic dance. For now, the galaxy's leaders were still attempting to maintain their composure, though their eyes never left the humans. But then, from the back of the room, came a voice that shattered the fragile calm. You humans are nothing but brutes. No civilization, no refinement. Just the raw power of an animal trying to pretend it belongs in the galaxy. The voice sneered. The speaker was Lord Xol, a minor imperial noble from the Ector Dominion, his voice dripping with contempt. He was a creature of angular features, his skin a dark, shimmering blue, adorned with spikes running down his spine. He leaned forward from his seat, his fingers tapping the armrest in a rhythmic challenge, eyes narrowing as he glared at the humans. Vance didn't flinch. He'd heard worse insults in his career, but it wasn't the words that bothered him. It was the fact that this pompous noble was so completely, dangerously misinformed. His face remained unreadable, even as Lieutenant Cross stiffened beside him. "I'm sure your people have their own way of doing things," Vance said, his voice unbothered, the words like a friendly pat on the back. "But you're wrong about us." Zold smirked, clearly pleased with himself for making the human captain respond. "Oh, am I? Your species, so new to the stars, so young, yet you show up here, thinking you can take our places, take our respect without so much as a single offering. Do you think you can earn your place among us? No, you will never understand the subtleties of real civilization." Vance's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "I don't need to understand your civilization to understand respect, Lord Saul. And that's where you're wrong." He took a step forward, eyes locking with the Ector noble. The entire room fell silent, everyone watching, holding their breath. In the back of the room, even the security personnel stood still, sensing the rising conflict. Sol's arrogance was like a flame, licking at the edge of something much larger. He stood now, rising from his chair, his posture exuding superiority. "Respect is earned, human, not handed out like a gift. And you." The insult was on the tip of his tongue when something unexpected happened. Before anyone could react, Vance's second-in-command, Lieutenant Sienna Cross, stepped forward. The movement was so fast it was a blur. In one fluid motion, she crossed the room and slammed her palm into the floor with a sharp crack, her voice cutting through the tension. "If you want to test us, Lord Saul, you can start with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Cross stood, her back straight, eyes unyielding. She was shorter than most of the delegates in the room, but her presence was like a physical force. The Ector noble's eyes widened as he took in the challenge. It wasn't just that she was a woman in a room full of men. It was that she was the challenge, the one who had taken down an entire group of assassins only days before. "Lord Saul," Vance said, his voice calm but with an edge, "if you have a problem with my crew, then I suggest you take it up with me. Or, if you're feeling brave enough, with Lieutenant Cross here." The room held its collective breath. A duel was a serious matter, one that could easily escalate into war. The pressure was palpable, the weight of the moment settling over every single person present. No one spoke, no one dared. For a long moment, Saul's eyes flickered from Vance to Cross, and back again. His posture tensed, his pride battling with his desire to avoid humiliation in front of so many witnesses. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his alien features. His bravado had crumbled, ever so slightly. Cross didn't blink. The challenge had been made. The room waited, frozen. Finally, Lord Saul sneered, but the arrogance had drained from his voice. "I will not waste my time with you, human," he spat, the words as sharp as the blade hidden beneath his cloak. He spun on his heel, storming out of the hall, the sound of his departure echoing in the silence. The moment he left, Vance's grin returned. "There, see. Now that's how you handle an insult." Cross gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, though her eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement. If he wanted a fight, he should have come prepared. The others in the room, shaken by the sheer intensity of the exchange, slowly began to return to their diplomatic roles. But the message had been sent loud and clear. Humanity wasn't here to beg for respect. They were here to claim it. The council hall was quieter than usual. It had been days since the humans' bold challenge, and while tensions were still high, the diplomats had returned to their positions, their formalities creeping back into the room. But something wasn't right. The air had shifted, heavy with the knowledge that the humans were not just here to make peace. They were here to test the galaxy's resolve. On the ISS Valiant, Captain Elias Vance stood on the bridge, staring out at the massive space station in the distance. The fleet had remained silent, but Vance could feel the pressure rising. His instincts told him something was off. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Cross over the comm, breaking the silence. We've picked up unusual activity in the lower sectors. We're seeing a buildup of energy signatures. It's not our fleet." Vance straightened. He knew that tone. "Ambush?" he asked, his voice cold. "Most likely," Cross replied, her voice steady despite the tension. "We've already locked down the corridors, but I think it's bigger than we thought. They're moving fast." Before Vance could respond, alarms blared across the ship. Red lights flashed, casting an eerie glow over the crew. The blaring sirens echoed throughout the Valiant, a warning that didn't need explaining. Someone had made a move, and it wasn't just a few rogue agents. This was organized. "Seal off all access points," Vance ordered. "Prepare for countermeasures. We're not going down without a fight." Cross's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, they've breached the lower levels. There's a small army moving in." Vance turned sharply to the tactical officer, who was already pulling up the schematics of the station. "Where's the point of entry?" The officer pointed to a section of the ship's interior, near the central core. "There. It looks like they're using the maintenance tunnels. They're not here for the crew. They're after the delegation." A cold realization settled over Vance. They hadn't been targeting his ship. They were going after his people. The galaxy's elite wanted to send a message. If you insult humanity, there are consequences. "I'll take a team down myself," Vance said, his voice low but intense. "Lieutenant Cross, you're with me. We'll meet them head-on." Within minutes, they suited up, heavy combat armor locking into place with mechanical precision. Their movements were swift and synchronized. This was what they did. What humanity did. As Vance and Cross made their way through the dimly lit corridors, they could hear the distant sounds of fighting. Gunfire, shouts, the metallic clatter of bodies against the cold, unforgiving floor. Their crew was already engaging the attackers, but there were too many of them, too well trained. They reached the breach point, an access hatch where the attackers had made their entry, and immediately, they were met with a hail of blaster fire. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burned metal. Vance ducked behind a pillar, pulling his rifle free. Cross did the same, scanning the area. "They're everywhere," Cross muttered under her breath, crouching low and peering around the corner. Vance gritted his teeth. "Then let's show them who they're dealing with." Without another word, Vance and Cross burst into the open, weapons raised. A dozen armed mercenaries, wearing the insignia of a rival galactic faction, turned in surprise as the humans launched their counterattack. The ISS Valiant soldiers moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Vance's rifle barked, cutting through the silence. A mercenary dropped to the floor with a single, precise shot. Cross was a blur of movement, her own blaster in hand, as she swiftly incapacitated another attacker with a shot to the chest. But they were still outnumbered. The enemies kept coming. More trained soldiers, more weapons, more bodies. And for a moment, Vance couldn't help but feel the weight of the fight pressing down on him. This was what they had come for. The challenge had been thrown, and humanity was about to prove it could answer. They moved like shadows, pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. But Vance knew this wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a statement. The humans weren't here to be pacified. They weren't here to be silenced. As the last mercenary fell, Vance stood over them, breathing heavily. He looked to Cross, who was already scanning their surroundings, her eyes sharp. "Well, that was fun," she said, her voice almost too casual for the intensity of the moment. Vance allowed himself a small grin, but his eyes remained hard. "This isn't over. We just sent them a message. But it's clear they're not done with us yet." And as they moved to regroup with their crew, Vance couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy had underestimated humanity. The war had only just begun. The Valiant drifted in the dark expanse of space, her engines humming softly as the crew gathered for a briefing. The assassination attempt had been repelled, but the repercussions were already rippling through the galaxy. There was no way to ignore the fact that humanity had become a lightning rod for conflict. But that was exactly what Captain Vance had anticipated. His hands rested on the edge of the briefing table, his mind racing through the implications of the attack. The galaxy's elite were nervous now, their illusion of invulnerability shattered by the humans' swift response. It wasn't just about the failed assassination. It was about what it meant for the balance of power. Captain. Lieutenant Cross entered the room, her expression unreadable. "We've received a communication from the Typhos Syndicate." Vance's brow furrowed. The Syndicate. They've been quiet for years. Why reach out now? Cross handed him a data pad, her eyes briefly flicking toward the screen. "They're offering an alliance." Vance took the pad, scanning the message with a sharp gaze. The Typhos Syndicate, a network of rogue traders, mercenaries, and shadow operatives, was infamous throughout the galaxy for operating in the gray areas. Their fleets weren't massive, but they were quick, deadly, and ruthlessly efficient. They had been watching humanity closely after the incident in the council hall. And now, they wanted a seat at the table. "They must know the political landscape is shifting," Vance murmured, stepping away from the table. "This could be a play to secure an ally before things get even uglier." "But why us?" Cross asked. "They've made a career out of staying out of galactic politics. They don't get involved unless it benefits them." "Exactly," Vance said, tapping the screen with a finger. "And we've just become the center of attention. We're the outliers now. If we play our cards right, we could leverage this." He looked at Cross. "Set up the meeting. It's time we find out what the Syndicate wants and what they're willing to give." The meeting took place on an unmarked freighter, a neutral location far from the watchful eyes of the galaxy's major powers. As Vance and Cross boarded the ship, they were met by a representative, a tall, sharp-eyed figure cloaked in dark robes. He didn't speak much but nodded toward the nearby holotable. The Syndicate was always efficient, always to the point. "Captain Vance," the voice came, calm and collected. "We've watched humanity with great interest. Your species is a problem, a solution that hasn't yet been fully realized. And now, with your recent actions, you've drawn the attention of those who wish to see you erased." Vance didn't flinch. "I'm guessing you don't want to erase us, then." The Syndicate representative didn't smile, but his eyes glinted with something dangerous. "No. We see opportunity in you, Captain. The galaxy is in chaos, and the Typhos Syndicate can offer you protection, resources, information." Cross stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What's the catch?" "The catch is simple," the Syndicate agent said smoothly. "You don't move without us. We help you secure your position, on one condition. When the time comes, you owe us, and we will collect." Vance leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "You want us to be indebted to you?" The agent nodded. "Everyone has a price, Captain. Even you." The air in the room seemed to thicken, the tension rising like a storm cloud. This wasn't just a business proposition. This was the kind of deal that could shift the tides of power in the galaxy. Vance knew it. Cross knew it. "I don't like owing anyone," Vance said after a long pause, his voice low. "But right now, we need leverage, and you have what we need." The agent's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "Exactly. Now, let's discuss terms." As the meeting dragged on, Vance could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Alliances were rarely simple. And this one could either make humanity's place in the galaxy stronger or bury them under the Syndicate's control. But that was a risk they had to take. The darkness of space stretched endlessly beyond the viewport of the Valiant, but inside the ship, the tension was palpable. The uneasy alliance with the Typhos Syndicate had been formed, and now the crew was preparing for their next move. The stakes were higher than ever. One wrong decision, and they could find themselves caught in the crossfire of a galactic war. Captain Vance stood at the center of the command deck, staring at the fleet's holographic display. His fingers drummed against the control panel as he considered their next steps. The Syndicate had given them access to valuable intel. Routes, hidden bases, and secret alliances. But Vance knew the price would come due sooner than expected. "Captain, we've received an encrypted message." Lieutenant Cross's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's from the Syndicate. They want a meeting." Vance frowned. The Syndicate had already given them their terms, and the deal was made. But this felt different. He motioned to Cross to bring up the message, and a flickering hologram appeared in the center of the room. The Syndicate representative from before appeared, his sharp eyes cold as ever. "Captain Vance," the agent began, his voice smooth, but laced with something darker. "We have a change of plans. The situation has escalated, and our interests have shifted. We have your ship locked in a containment field, and I suggest you comply with our new demands if you wish to leave in one piece." Vance's heart skipped a beat. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but his face remained a mask of calm. "Explain." "We no longer wish to work with you as equals," the agent continued, his expression unchanging. "Your species has proven unpredictable. You've gained too much attention, and it's time to cut you loose. You'll surrender your ship and its crew, and in exchange, we'll allow your people to survive. Refuse, and we will make an example of you." The message ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Vance's eyes narrowed as he exchanged a glance with Cross. He could feel the weight of the Syndicate's betrayal, a feeling that gnawed at the pit of his stomach. They had been used, manipulated, and now they were being discarded like pawns. "We need to move fast," Vance said, his voice low but firm. "Cross, get to the engine room. I want full power diverted to shields and weapons. Prepare for a fight. Everyone else, get to your stations." As the crew scrambled to action, Vance's mind raced. This wasn't just a business transaction anymore. The Syndicate wasn't going to let them walk away. They were after control, and they would stop at nothing to get it. "I want every crew member to be on alert," Vance ordered. "We've been betrayed, and it's time to make sure they regret it." Cross's voice crackled over the comms as she worked. "Captain, they've locked down the docking bays. We won't be able to escape that way." Vance's eyes darkened as he turned back to the holographic display. "Then we'll have to fight our way out." The Valiant wasn't the largest ship in the fleet, but it was fast, maneuverable, and heavily armed. Vance's crew had trained for every possible scenario, but this was something else. He could already hear the sound of footsteps on the metal floors of the ship, the threat of an incoming assault heavy in the air. In the distance, he could see the outline of the Syndicate's fleet, small, sleek ships that were as deadly as they were fast. They would board the Valiant soon, and when they did, Vance knew it would be a battle for their lives. He wasn't about to surrender, not without a fight. He turned to Cross once more. "We're not going down without a fight. Lieutenant, make sure the crew knows what's at stake." Cross nodded, her face set with determination. "Understood, Captain." The ship's alarms began to blare again, a warning that their attackers were closing in. The Valiant was now on a collision course with chaos. As the crew prepared for the oncoming assault, Vance stood at the helm, his mind a whirl of tactics and plans. The Syndicate had thought they could take them down. They were wrong. This fight wasn't just about survival. It was about sending a message. Humanity wouldn't be intimidated. And if the galaxy wanted a war, they were ready to fight for it. The Valiant shook as another blast rattled her hull. The enemy ships were closing in, their sleek forms cutting through space with deadly precision. Captain Vance stood at the command console, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the approaching Syndicate fleet. They were outnumbered, and their escape routes had been blocked. The fight was on. "Captain, the shields are holding for now, but they won't last much longer." Lieutenant Cross called from her station, her voice tense. Vance nodded, his mind already calculating their next move. They had one chance, one shot to turn the tables before the Syndicate overwhelmed them. The crew was ready, though they had no illusions about the odds. This was going to be their final stand. "Prepare the guns," Vance ordered. "I want every cannon firing. We need to make them think twice." The Valiant's weapon systems hummed to life, and the ship's pulse lasers erupted into a dazzling display of deadly light. The first wave of Syndicate ships veered off, their shields flickering under the barrage, but they quickly regrouped and returned fire. Cross's fingers flew across the console, coordinating the ship's defense. Direct hit on the port side. Hull integrity at 70%. Vance gritted his teeth, staring at the screen as more enemy ships descended on them. There was no room for hesitation now. Get us in closer to their command ship. We're going to hit them where it hurts. The crew scrambled to respond, working in perfect unison as the ship's engines roared to life, pushing the Valiant forward into the heart of the Syndicate's formation. Every inch closer to the enemy was a risk, but Vance knew they couldn't afford to wait. The Syndicate was playing for keeps. "On my mark," Vance said, his voice steady but full of authority. "When we're in range, we target their engines. We cripple their mobility, then hit their command center. We take out their leadership, and the rest will scatter." Cross looked up at him, a sharp gleam in her eyes. "Understood, Captain." The Valiant surged forward, dodging incoming blasts and weaving through the chaotic field of enemy ships. Vance's pulse quickened as the distance closed. He could feel the weight of the crew's reliance on him, the pressure of their survival hanging by the thinnest thread. This was it. They had no backup, no reinforcements, just them and the Syndicate. "Now," Vance barked. The ship's guns fired in rapid succession, each blast a hammer strike against the enemy's shields. The Syndicate ships began to fall back, their formation faltering under the intense fire. Vance didn't let up. He pushed the Valiant closer, right into the heart of the enemy fleet. He could see their command ship now, a massive vessel, bristling with weapons and defense systems, its hull scarred from countless battles. "Lock onto their engine core," Vance ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Fire everything we've got." The Valiant's main cannons roared, launching a devastating volley of energy blasts. The impact was immediate. The Syndicate's command ship shuddered, its engines sputtering as a cloud of sparks erupted from the rear. The Valiant didn't stop. They pushed forward, tearing into the enemy's rear flank, pushing the Syndicate's forces into disarray. "Direct hit. Their engines are down," Cross shouted, her voice triumphant. But just as Vance allowed himself a brief moment of relief, a chilling transmission cut through the noise. "Captain Vance, you've made a grave mistake." The voice was cold, smooth, and unmistakable. The same Syndicate agent who had betrayed them. "You think you can defeat us? You think this is your victory?" Vance's jaw clenched as the transmission continued. "We already have what we came for. Your ship will be destroyed, and your people will learn their place in the galaxy." The transmission ended with a finality that echoed in the cold silence that followed. But Vance didn't flinch. He knew this was far from over. They had taken down the Syndicate's engines, crippled their flagship, but there were still more ships in the field. "We've won the first round," Vance muttered under his breath. "But the war isn't over yet." As the Valiant continued to fight, the crew holding their ground against the seemingly endless tide of Syndicate forces, one thing became clear. Humanity had proven its strength. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, and humanity was ready to claim its place at the forefront. And no one, not even the Syndicate, could stop them now. The Valiant drifted through the aftermath of the battle, her hull battered and scorched, her engines barely holding together. The Syndicate's ships had been driven back, but not without cost. The crew was exhausted, their faces drawn from the brutal fight, yet there was a spark of triumph in their eyes. They had survived. They had won, but at what price? Captain Vance stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the vast emptiness of space outside the viewport. The remains of the Syndicate fleet floated like debris, their once proud ships reduced to twisted wrecks. But the Valiant was still intact, just barely. "Captain," Lieutenant Cross's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We've received a transmission from the Galactic Council." Vance's brow furrowed. The Council had been silent until now, but he knew their hands would be forced by the events that had just transpired. "Put it through." A hologram flickered to life before him, and the stern face of Counselor Rylan appeared. His gaze was sharp, but there was a flicker of something else, something unreadable, as he spoke. "Captain Vance," Rylan began, his voice heavy with the weight of galactic politics. "We have been watching your actions closely. You've made your mark on the galaxy, and you've earned the attention of many. The Syndicate is not the only force you'll have to contend with." Vance crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "I'm aware. But the Syndicate is out of the picture for now." "Not entirely," Rylan corrected, his tone flat. "While you were engaged with them, the real power behind the Syndicate, those who stand in the shadows, have taken note. Your victory has made you a target, not just for them, but for others who will now come after you. The galaxy is far from united, Captain." Vance's mind raced. The Syndicate had been just the beginning, the spark that ignited the powder keg. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but now the fight was bigger than just one enemy. It was a war for humanity's place in the galaxy. "You're telling me they're coming for us next?" Vance asked, his voice low. "More than that," Rylan replied, his gaze hardening. "They've been waiting for someone. Someone who could unite the galaxy's fractured factions. You've become that someone, Captain Vance." Vance felt a chill run through him. He had no illusions about the weight of his actions, but the realization that humanity had already shifted the balance of power in the galaxy was both exhilarating and terrifying. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "We will defend ourselves," Vance said firmly, his voice rising with the certainty that had carried him through the darkest moments of the battle. "Humanity will not be pushed around anymore." The transmission flickered, and Rylan's image shifted to a more somber expression. "I hope you're ready, Captain. Because the galaxy will test you like never before." The hologram vanished, leaving Vance with the heavy weight of what lay ahead. The Valiant was still standing, but the war had just begun. The Syndicate might have been beaten back, but other enemies were already circling, waiting for their moment to strike, and humanity had made itself a target. Vance turned toward the crew, who were now regrouping after the battle. They were battered, but they were also alive. The energy in the room was palpable. The victory, though hard won, had changed them all. They had proven that humans could hold their ground in the vast, uncaring galaxy. "We've come this far," Vance said, his voice strong. "Now we're going to make sure the galaxy remembers who we are." The crew cheered, their voices rising in unison. Vance felt a surge of pride. They had faced down the impossible and emerged victorious. But the true test was still to come. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity, and neither were its enemies. Humanity was no longer just surviving in the galaxy. They were ready to thrive.